Right.
Yeah, okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Talal Rafi, and I will be moderating this webinar. And so welcome to the webinar on restructuring of foreign and local debt and the impact on the economy and society, organized by the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, which is the national professional management accounting body in Sri Lanka. So what we have is a very interesting and relevant topic on the effects of restructuring local and foreign debt in Sri Lanka. And so currently the situation is that the staff level agreement by the IMF being signed is a very positive step, but that is just the beginning. It all depends on the foreign debt sustainability being achieved, for which we need debt restructuring as a whole. And so we have three types of creditors: the multilaterals, the bondholders, and the bilaterals. So it's kind of a very complex process, especially when we look at Zambia, which where even after a staff level agreement, it took 7 months for China to agree to debt restructuring. I mean, even here, the main focus would be how China handles this. So with the Paris Club being generally easier to negotiate with. And then we come to the local debt restructuring, which may come up, but will have devastating effects. So even according to Fitch, a default on local currency debt could have adverse effects on Sri Lanka's banking sector that would erode the net benefits of such a restructuring. So even a restructuring wouldn't be worth it because of the devastating effects. So how do we move forward from here? And what will be the impacts of restructuring? So we have three speakers. And so the first one speaker would be Dr. Harsha De Silva, who is a member of parliament and the former Minister of Economic Reforms. And after that, will be followed by Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe, who's the chairman of CBC Finance. He's a former chairman of Commercial Bank and a former senior deputy governor of the central bank. And lastly, we have Mr. Mangala Boyagoda, who is a financial consultant and former senior banker. And at the end, a vote of thanks will be given by Henayaka Bandara, who is the vice president of CMA Sri Lanka. So before the presentation begins, I'll invite Professor Lakshman Watawala, who is the founder, president of CMA Sri Lanka, to give a welcome address. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Talal Rafi. Mr. Talal Rafi is a development economist. He's a financial consultant and development economist, and will be handling our session. He'll be the moderator of the session. So thank you very much, Mr. Talal Rafi, for the introduction that you have given. And our speakers who have been already introduced, Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe, Mr. Mangala Boyagoda, and we have Mr. Henayaka Bandara, who's our Vice President of CMA and also the President of SAFA. We have, so let me welcome all our council members, our invitees, our members of CMA, and all the corporate participants who are present here. So as I said earlier, we have our speakers, Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe and Mr. Mangala Boyagoda, and Dr. Harsha De Silva will join us very shortly. So I think we are very happy to welcome all of you to this seminar or the webinar on the restructuring of foreign and local debt and impact on the economy and society. So I will not speak too much on the debt restructuring because we have a very eminent panel of experts who will be touching that area. So as was said, now the government has had the interim budget which highlighted the proposals to create a new economy with reforms and reliefs, and this has been approved by the Parliament. So we are happy that they have put into effect something that is required by the IMF, and also mention was there of the IMF staff level agreement, which reached a 4-year extended fund facility worth US dollars 2.9 billion. And of course, this will give a reassurance to our creditors in order that they will be ready to undertake the restructuring. So just to tell about our profession, of course, we are involved in the management accounting profession and of course, cost and management accounting. And although it may not relate to the restructuring side, but we are really a professional management accounting body involved in both the financial and the costing area, and of course looking at certain developments that are taking place. So if the restructuring is going to be successful, we need to look at how the management is also going to be maybe restructured, and we will be able to reassure all our creditors and the IMF that we can carry out the various matters relating to cost management. Now, it was mentioned in the interim budget about expenditure management and expenditure control, and also maybe to get assistance from the US on this area. So that's a key area. So cost and management, now we are having the inflationary controls, then of course the correct cost of a product has to be measured, and every day the prices are increasing, and this is another major problem. Then we of course have the shortage of the foreign exchange, the depreciation in the currency, then the fuel prices going up, and so everything is affecting the society, so that we are looking at the society, and the society is really a key area one would really be looking at, because if all these costs will be impacting them, and ultimately it will be the society that has to be paid. A lot of the matters that are mentioned in the interim budget, like the restructuring of the state-owned enterprises. Now that's a major area, but we need to see how this has to be carried out. But also, if we need certain immediate action, then of course we need to see that the management has to be improved. They may be asked to publish their accounts within 45 days, similar to public quoted companies, and maybe necessary action has to be taken. So everything is really dependent on how the management is going to be carried out. So government, the ministries, the secretaries, all of them would need to take necessary action on this. So if you look at the management accounting profession, the cost control is connected with the efficiency, the productivity. This should result in our competitiveness, and of course we need to prevent wastage and corruption if this has to really take place. So these are very important areas that have to be carried out and done. So I don't know whether our speaker, Dr. Harsha De Silva, is in, but he's supposed to come. Now it's 2:40. But what we can do, Talal, is maybe till he comes, we can get our Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe to speak, and then maybe when he comes, then we may have to see how we can make a necessary adjustment. So over to you, Talal, to commence the sessions.
Sure. Thank you, Professor. So now we'll have Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe to speak, to present on the thing. So he's the chairman of CBC Finance and the former chairman of Commercial Bank and a senior deputy governor of the Central Bank. Go ahead.
Thank you, Talal, for the introduction. And thank you, Professor Lakshman Matawala and CMA Sri Lanka for inviting me to be on this panel this afternoon. The subject matter was clearly explained by the moderator as well as Professor Lakshman. We are talking about debt restructuring, and why we are talking about debt restructuring today. I must say that it's very timely and very pertinent, and it's talk of the day because we have come to a situation that the government of Sri Lanka in April, few months ago, April this year, declared that Sri Lanka is unable to service its foreign debt. And as we have clearly mentioned, we have both foreign and domestic debt. So up until now, since April 2022, the government of Sri Lanka has not paid whatever the foreign debt that has fallen due. So I'll just start by giving you few numbers and to tell you how much debt the government of Sri Lanka has as at date, or rather as at end of August, a total of 24.3 trillion in Sri Lanka rupees, of which 11.7 billion, or rather 11.7 trillion. So there are 1,000 billions for a trillion. So you have to get the number in billions, you have to multiply this by 1,000. So 11.7 trillion domestic debt, of which 3.4 trillion treasury bills and 8.23 billion treasury bonds, comes to a total of 11.7 trillion. And foreign debt in rupee terms, foreign debt is always denominated in foreign currency, but I have got the rupee value. Foreign debt total as at end of August is 12.6 trillion. Okay, now we are going to touch on both foreign and domestic debt because it's government debt, and the government of Sri Lanka, the authorities have sought IMF assistance, and that process has started now about 6 to 7 months ago. And recently we had a staff mission here headed by Peter Brewer, and most of you would have, I'm sure, has seen the video of his presentation, or in print media also the wide publicity was given, and in social media, WhatsApp and Facebook, this was circulated. So people are well aware of the fact that the IMF mission has concluded its consultations with Sri Lankan authorities, and then according to the IMF statement, which they have made at the end of the staff level agreement, is that this staff level agreement will have to be submitted to the board of directors, executive board of the International Monetary Fund, and then get approval. Up until then, that presentation itself carried some details of their conditionality, and one is the restructuring of debt. And now that we have come to a situation in Sri Lanka, the government has defaulted and debt has to be restructured. There is no option other than restructuring, because the IMF, Sri Lanka is a member country of IMF. One of the responsibilities of IMF is to ensure that the debt that their member countries have issued is sustainable. So debt sustainability is prime responsibility and concern of the IMF, even without IMF program. We have had some IMF consultations prior to this number of times. Since 1950s, we have been having IMF consultation, and it's well known that Sri Lanka has gone to the IMF for 16 times. This is the 17th time. There was only one occasion that Sri Lanka was successful, which was in 2009. And I was on the IMF executive board at that time, and we negotiated a standby arrangement, which is called SBA, for $2.6 billion, and we got the entire amount and got it dispersed, and we repaid that amount in full by 2014. The loan was fully settled. So that was the only occasion in the past Sri Lanka was successful with IMF programs. And hopefully this time the IMF staff level agreement has stated that they are considering 2.9 billion US dollars as their program, which is an extended fund facility, EFF they call it, and that will be submitted to the IMF board very soon. But one of the preconditions I mentioned a little while ago is debt sustainability and debt restructuring, and the IMF is expecting the authorities, the Sri Lankan authorities, to negotiate with its creditors and restructure. Why are we talking about restructuring? Because we are not in a position to pay our debt. And I'll first touch on the foreign debt, which the figure I gave was 12.6 trillion in rupees. This debt has been raised at different times. If I may touch upon a little bit of history of foreign debt, we were a low-income country till recently, when we crossed the low middle income threshold about 15 years ago. Up until then, we had the privilege or opportunity to get concessional debt from multilateral and bilateral sources. And in mid-1990s, the Sri Lanka issued its first commercial debt, which is 50 million US dollars, which was a syndicated loan. And thereafter, in 2004, the next commercial debt was 100 million US dollars issued.
Mr. Dharma, I think Dr. Harisha is here. So
Right.
because he has some time limits, can we
Right.
hand over to him? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Harsha, if you are ready, you can start your presentation. Waiting. Dr. Harsha, are you there? Don't know whether he's logged in, but Dr. Harsha, are you there? Mr. Dharmadhir Singh, you can continue. He will take a little time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. At the time I was
Sorry about
interrupted,
that.
I was touching on the bit of a history of commercial foreign debt. And in 2004, the government of Sri Lanka raised 100 million US dollars of syndicated loan. And then thereafter, in 2007, first international sovereign bond was issued in the market for 500 million US dollars. And then the second sovereign bond issue was in 2010. Thereafter, until 2019, there were sovereign bond issues, several issues. And at the time that we defaulted the repayment of sovereign bonds, Sri Lanka had a liability of 13.15 billion US dollars of sovereign bonds. And that is capital only, principal only. And if you add to that the interest payments up until 2030, we have the liability. The debt is not restructured as far as the sovereign bond is concerned, and total liability will amount to about 19 billion US dollars. And altogether, other foreign debt, you take multilateral debt, bilateral debt, commercial debt, trade debt, whatever that have been raised by the government from sources like multilateral, bilateral, and trade creditors and other sources will be in US dollar terms about 53 billion. So that's the amount of foreign debt that the government of Sri Lanka is liable as at present. And when it comes to the domestic debt, I told you that the total domestic debt, both T-bills and T-bonds, is 11.7 trillion at the moment, as at end of August this year. So this is domestic debt, and the domestic debt in Sri Lanka is raised under the Treasury Bill Ordinance, which are called Treasury Bills, and the ordinance is traced back to 1924. We started raising debt from the public for the government of Sri Lanka, and Treasury bonds issued under the provisions of the Registered Stocks and Securities Ordinance 1938. And there were amendments to both the T-bill and RSSR, that's Registered Stock and Securities Ordinance, up until recently. And under the RSSR, the government of Sri Lanka earlier raised what is known as rupee loans, because the loans were raised during the British time. The debt was known as rupee loans, and now we call it treasury bonds, which is a tradable instrument. The rupee loans are not tradable. So we have a total of 11.7 trillion of that domestic debt, and of that central bank holdings of T-bills, which is also an important figure at the moment, about 2.23 billion treasury bills held by the central bank. So when it comes to restructuring, at the moment we are only going by the information available to us in public domain. And I can remember Dr. Harsha De Silva yesterday or day before in Parliament also raised the question that information is still confidential, held by the authorities, and he wanted the information shared in the Parliament. So no one has that confidential information. We only know that the IMF has put forward this as a precondition before they go to the IMF board of directors for approval of this 2.9 billion US dollars of extended fund facility. So we have to satisfy this condition. And the IMF, if you have listened to Peter Brewer's presentation, you would have heard that among other things, he spoke about other requirements in addition to debt restructuring to make our debt, the government debt, viable, and we have borrowed this money both from local and foreign sources, so we have no option but to repay. And what we mean by restructuring is that the fact that we cannot settle this debt as it is, the principal plus interest, we need to negotiate with the creditors. Now, if it comes to foreign debt, I just mentioned in some detail the international sovereign bond, which is a instrument that was used for raising debt. And I said the total sovereign bond liability is amounted to 19 billion capital plus the interest. So we need to negotiate with those creditors, the investors who have invested in SLBs and other multilateral and bilateral creditors who have invested in Sri Lanka and from whom the government has borrowed. So in restructuring, what happens is that we will increase the repayment period, and maybe we will go for a haircut, and then also we also have the flexibility of negotiating the interest rates. So we may negotiate the interest rates and reduce the interest payment liability as well. So we hopefully the government at the end of the day, successful, we will have a liability which is lower than what we have on paper at the moment. So hopefully we will be able to, the government of Sri Lanka, the strategy now is to talk to these creditors. The government has appointed financial and legal consultants and got the legal and financial advice a few months ago, and hopefully the government authorities will be negotiating with these creditors in the future. And once these requirements are satisfied, only the IMF board of directors will give its approval for the 2.9 billion US dollar extended fund facility. And the IMF staff level agreement that has been reached last week or week before also has other conditions that they are also, I think one of the subject we are touching on in this webinar also. I think Professor Lakshman, you would like to know how this situation is going to affect the poor and generally the masses, and also the impact of debt restructuring on economy of Sri Lanka. I think which are very, very pertinent subjects, and we can have a useful discussion based on those lines as well. So, and also one of the remarks that Professor Lakshman, you made in your introduction is that now that the interim budget has been presented in Parliament and has been approved, and there we see the government revenue and government expenditure. I think we can see the government expenditure is twice as much as the government revenue. So the about 2 trillion has to be borrowed. Otherwise, the interim budget or whatever the budget cannot be financed without the borrowing. So this has to be borrowed. So that's a large amount of money. And also now that I have mentioned that the sources of government borrowing locally is the treasury bill and treasury bonds. Treasury bill is a zero coupon bill, and which is a short-term borrowing, and treasury bond is a coupon bond that is issued to borrow medium to long-term debt. So we need even to finance the interim budget, we need more borrowing. So what will happen when we run, when the government runs a huge fiscal deficit? The fiscal deficit has gone over 10%, and also there have been some measures proposed in that interim budget will bring this fiscal deficit down to low middle level or mid level, single digit, and hopefully with these measures that the government has proposed in the budget, we will see that the fiscal deficit comes down to a manageable level. If the fiscal deficit stays at these level and increases, which means the government will have to borrow more and more. And in a situation where at the moment, as it is, we are discussing, the Sri Lankan government has defaulted its debt in terms of foreign debt, and domestic debt also is a concern. At the moment, the domestic debt, whatever the maturing domestic debt is being repaid, and with this kind of fiscal deficit, the government is at the moment running, domestic debt will also not be sustainable. And when it comes to restructuring government debt, it means both the foreign and domestic debt. So the government will have no option to go for restructuring of domestic debt as well. Is that okay? We can have further discussion later. If there are questions, maybe we can take up those questions.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Devasinghe. So we'll take the questions during the Q&A. So I'll introduce Dr. Harsha De Silva, who is a member of Parliament and a former Minister of Economic Reforms. Go ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I only see gentlemen on the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, is ladies present. I first need to apologize for some issues here. I'm really stuck in Parliament, and I'm speaking from Parliament now because we had a discussion on this whole coal tender matter, and need to figure out how we're going to proceed. I mean, I'll start with that. The issue is that this country is basically run out of money, right? And there is no money to even import the absolute essentials. And what the central bank has decided to do is to crush demand, increase interest rates, and basically force people from importing. That is still better than banning imports. But in this case, we have also banned certain items and just made it absolutely impossible to spend on expenditure. So you're trying to shrink the economy. You're trying to go in for austerity measures. You're trying to, and the results of which will be, I think, -8% or so growth this year, and maybe negative growth again next year. and then get back to some sort of normalcy in years to come. Or perhaps next year might be no growth or maybe slightly positive. Now, in this whole context is our seminar here on how to move forward, restructuring foreign and local debt. Now, as far as we are aware, and we've had discussions with the IMF, and we meet government people on a daily basis. I chair the Public Finance Committee, so there is quite a bit of, frank opinions expressed, and to an extent, I'm aware how bad the situation is, and it does not, to me, look like things are getting very much better as expected in a short period of time. And I'm a little bit surprised that even the remittances have fallen this month over the last month unexpectedly, because the thinking was, look, once the exchange rate is adjusted, or let the market adjust the rate to whatever it ought to be or close by to it, things should improve. But that improvement may be coming in small doses that cannot be really seen very much. Now, the issue is, we have presented, or the Prime Minister, or rather the President, presented a interim budget, and he's certainly trying to increase revenue. Today, we will pass the 2.5% turnover tax, which, according to my accountant friends, could be maybe anywhere between 5 to perhaps even 5 plus, as a VAT, if you thought about it that way, and try to improve the fiscal position of the government. Doing all that is going to hopefully help us, negotiate with the creditors. This is what this discussion is about. So for the creditors to negotiate, agree on a haircut, they'll have to have a certain assurance or confidence that Sri Lanka, at least after the period of the extension, that we would be able to start repaying. To start repaying, obviously we'll have to make sure that we have enough saved in the kitty to start repaying. And of course, the markets, the doors of the capital markets will open again, and there will be an opportunity to go into to roll over some of what is coming due. But things will have to change dramatically, right? And the kind of assurance that the IMF is expecting from us is for the primary balance of the budget to move from what they say might be around -4% something this year. Last year it was close to -6%, to 2.5% almost by 2025. And that is going to be a seriously difficult task to try and achieve. The objective is very, very difficult. You see, if you look at the previous programs of other countries, trying to improve the primary deficit by 1 or 2% has been sort of tough. And I think the mean is about 1%. But here, to try to go from -0.4 to 2.3 is a hugely difficult task. Now, unless we meet those targets, will creditors agree to a reasonable haircut, right? And will they say, look, the pain has to be shared, and look at the debt service. If you look at the debt service, a bigger component, significantly bigger component is for domestic debt repayment, right? So how will cutting just foreign debt help resolve the problem of having to meet the domestic debt repayment issue? So if they insist that there has to be some sort of restructuring of the domestic debt, what would happen there? You see, I mean, I was just reading the Zambian IMF agreement that was just published today or yesterday. And in that, they say that they avoided domestic debt restructure because otherwise the stability of the financial markets would be seriously threatened. And if that happens, then in Sri Lanka, I mean, Dharma is here, you know, Henayaka is here. I mean, I don't know whether NSB actually invested in any of this, but Combank for sure has a very large exposure. And so does HNB and a bunch of other banks. So I think there is no way out of a haircut of some sort on the ISBs that these banks hold, and also on the Sri Lanka development bonds. But if rupee debt is touched, then of course capital adequacy issues are going to become serious. And whether one would look at it as a complete breakdown of the system, or whether one would look at it as an opportunity to perhaps bring in equity from outside. I don't necessarily mean the private banks, but also I don't know to what extent state banks are exposed. Then perhaps you can think about it in a different way. But in any case, even to get to the question of what kind of restructure, what kind of haircut, what kind of postponement of principal and interest payments, before any of that, the legislature here must be in agreement with the kind of fiscal adjustments that need to be done, particularly tax reforms. And that is to be dependent upon how difficult it is for the government to sell these adjustments to the people. And when inflation at 94%, food inflation at 94%, people are malnourished. World Food Program has just said that, you know, 80% of households or something like that, you know, have to skip a meal. I think not 80%, some significant amount. Then you have a problem, right? You really have a problem. So in the way I see it from my perspective as a politician, you know, this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be easy. And if domestic restructure has to take place, then things will really become very, very tough. So I just wanted to, you know, make some remarks about how I see this, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, Lakshman, if there are any.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harsha. I think actually one of the problems that we are now faced is, of course, criticism is very easy, you know, but then when you criticize, you must tell how you can solve the problem also. But I see that the private sector is a great source of strength for you, because all your taxes, all the additional, maybe the revenue that is going to come on from exports is going to be done by the private sector. So unless there is going to be a public-private partnership in all activities, even in the management of the public, in the institutions, the ministries and others, I think we are going to run into a big problem. So I just want to find out from you how you are really now taking loans is one thing, but then once we take the loans, we have to generate the income in order to repay the loan. So how do you think that we can make use of the private sector in order to assist the government to solve these problems? Other than, of course, tax we can pay, but more than the tax, the management of the public sector institutions, the ministries and others.
I mean, I am fully for reforms. I mean, I have always been, and just because I'm in the opposition, I'm not going to oppose the reforms the government is proposing. We will support the reforms. And I think that that is essential. And even our discussions with the IMF, they were glad to note that we were not putting a spoke in the wheel. You see, we are not trying to disrupt the government's program with the IMF. We are not, right? And that signal was sent very clearly. However, what needs to be understood is that these reforms have to be palatable. It has to be absorbed. Otherwise, people will not be able to survive. You see, so it is in that context that we have to look at sort of the social justice aspect of this also. Yes, the businessmen could pay, exporters are okay, but what about the common person on the street? I mean, so here I am saying poverty has perhaps increased by tenfold in this country in the last 2.5 years. And I'm serious because the way poverty was measured, we were told that poverty was at something like 4% or something. I think it is maybe half the population is, unable to sort of meet those standards anymore. So in terms of the private sector, yes, I'm glad that people like Vishko Indasamy and the chamber, Ceylon chamber and all have been positive and making statements saying the private sector is supportive and they're willing to pay more taxes and all that. But really the issue is long term. Certainly we have to start earning dollars and we have to unshackle the economy. We have to connect Sri Lanka with the rest of the world. And massive reforms will have to take place in trade and investment policy. All that needs to happen. But I'll tell you one thing is that every investment dollar, every FDI is not the same. If you look at the island, what happened to them during their crisis was, look, they borrowed overseas and invested that money in apartment buildings, and they were non-tradables. Right? So that understanding must happen that a dollar foreign direct investment dollar invested in a tradable good, right? In a tradable good production is so much better than invested in a non-tradable. Why they are investing in non-tradables in these sectors that are closed is because the profit motive is far outweighs everything else, right? So the incentive is there. So it is for the government to create a incentive package that it is actually better off for putting money into export-driven, export-led, or rather export industries than putting it into apartment buildings and building roads and other things, right? So that incentive change has to happen through government policy, right? And so there is a big role for the government to try and direct that investment into, like what the professor whatever just mentioned, projects that would, or industries or sectors that would generate dollars. So obviously the long-term or the medium-term plan has to be to get investors into the tradable sector.
Dr. Harsha, thank you very much. How do you see the government and the opposition working? Because actually, at the moment, people are not worried about politics. They want people, the government, when they say government, it will be both the opposition and the people in power. So how do you think that you all can work with the government to assist to solve these problems? Because people are wanting solutions.
People want solutions, that is true. But to create solutions, I mean, to clap, you need two hands, right? I mean, I have been a major proponent of some sort of unity, national, whatever you want to call it, government, right? All party, multi-party. That hasn't happened, right? And that hasn't happened for the simple reason that there is no sort of time frame. See, this is an interim setup, right? It cannot go on till the rest of the term, till 2025. When you form something like that, bringing all parties or many parties together, then it has to have, okay, these are the things we are going to achieve. This is the common minimum program. And this is the day when we say we part company, right? But instead of that, to say, look, you all just come on an open check, sign an open check, and we will continue. That won't work. That certainly won't work. But if there is a time period, I am certain that we could get almost all parties to work together. Now today, on the one hand, we went and whacked a 2.5% turnover tax, let's say 5% VAT, right? While that was happening, in the president's office, 37 ministers were sworn in. I mean, how do you reconcile this? How do you reconcile this? And that is going to erode the public confidence in the government, and you say also in the opposition, right? So on the one hand, you are trying to raise taxes, you are trying to increase revenue, and on the other side, you are not cutting down on your expenditure. I grant that it is a small amount, what is spent on these ministers in the whole, the big scheme of things. But this is a very strong message nevertheless. Now I'll tell you also what are priorities in spending. So we have to agree on prioritized spending. Now, I'll give you a classic example. Today, I just mentioned it in Parliament. I saw the outstanding bills the Treasury has. 75 billion for roads, 25 billion for the military. Okay? And believe me, Boya, only 1 billion for education. 100 billion for roads and military, 1 billion for education. Right? So if this whole ideology, or what the government wants to do is to spend on these areas that is not priority, and then if everybody gets into that as a all party or multi-party or whatever it is you call it, government and opposition together, then everyone will people will lose confidence in everyone. So without a common minimum program, Lakshman, you cannot. This is fundamental. So the common minimum program has to be political, and it has to be economic. And I tell you, I see this every day in Parliament. You have to have a mandate. Right? You have to have a mandate. If you don't have a mandate, it is almost impossible to shove reform down the throats of people. And in most countries where you've seen sort of these types of bankruptcies and defaults and coming out of these terrible circumstances, you've seen churn, multiple. Churn has been high. Governments last for sometimes, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, new government, again a new one. So I don't know how many times our governments will change, but I'll tell you one thing, I think it will, right? Because if you look at the evidence, that is precisely how things have gone. And only after you get a government with a proper mandate by the people will this whole thing stabilize.
Thank you, Dr. Harsha. I'll hand you over to our moderator, Talal, because there are
Yeah.
lot of questions from, if you can wait a few minutes and answer them, Dr. Harsha.
Sure. Hi, Harsha. Then one of the questions is, you spoke a lot about the goal of achieving a primary fiscal surplus of 2.3. That's a long climb. But also, Fitch says that non-discretionary expenditure of the government, especially when it comes to wages and interest rates, is around 130% of government revenue. So that's a lot. And today I was just reading the plaintiff of Hamilton, and what they have stated is that while this is going on in July, the government still paid interest in dollars, not the government, Sri Lankan Airlines. So indirectly the government for this. So they were just complaining about how this is going through. So what are your thoughts? Have we got to a point where SOEs have to be structured? And also in certain sectors such as hotels or retail, do we have to completely privatize them? Because this is a very big burden, and it's sometimes when you hear it from foreign bondholders, these are not just big companies such as BlackRock, but these are also pension funds. So they have a point. So I'm not saying we should go too hard on taxation, but certain SOEs, what would be your view?
Yeah, SOE, you have to dichotomize this issue. One is who owns it, how is it managed on the one hand. The other is the cost recovered by the tariff. These are two separate things, right? One could argue that unless you have cost-reflective tariffs, neither the public ownership nor private ownership will be able to succeed. And I think most will agree here, right? So the Ceylon Electricity Board was to make 600 billion rupees loss this year, 600 billion, right? If you think about it, that's a colossal amount of money, right? So by adjusting tariffs, I hope that the losses would reduce. But as we speak today in Parliament, the MPs are meeting with the officials and others on the restructure of the Ceylon Electricity Board. This is a good thing. And we have been talking about it for 20 years, how DISCOs and the TRANSCO and the GENCOs need to be separated. And this behemoth of a agency or institution, broken into several pieces. How that is going to be done, I think there will be some agreement in Parliament, which is good. And that should have, support from political parties, immaterial of what the ideologies are, because ultimately what we need to make sure is that there is some sort of equity, some sort of social justice, right? And the subsidy that instead of coming through the SOE should come as cash transfers to the consumer and so on. So therefore, privatization is one option. Part privatization is another option. Competition is yet another option. So there are various different types of reform that should happen. And I don't think there is one single prescription for all different entities. So I'm sure that we will find a way that is acceptable to the people of this country. Whether that will happen within this government's tenure or whether it will happen down the road, I don't know. But what I'm saying is, I'm certain it will happen.
Sure. Right. And just to follow up on that, for the SOEs, do you think the Singapore model might work, a super holding because what we found was Singapore listed all of their SOEs under this. And what is interesting is that these SOEs which come under these super holding companies outperform the private sector. So, but one of the things they did was like the management was like excellent and highly paid. So would that be a sort of a solution?
I couldn't answer that because I think there needs to be, more in-depth study. And I think the National Agency for Public-Private Partnership has been reconstituted as of this week. Hopefully they will be able to shed light on that.
Right. Okay. And the other one is, for example, one of the main things would be an independent central bank. And so in that, just from the layman perspective, what do you mean by a sort of an independent central bank? And what would be if it's too independent, how would it be accountable?
I mean, Dharma is the former central banker. Right. What it means to be independent means many things to many people. But what it means to us is that the central bank should be taken off the grip of the treasury. So what we want to do is to remove the fiscal dominance of monetary policy. Right. You see, it is not the central bank's fault that it is printing money. Central bank is printing money because the treasury is forcing them to print money, right? So there are many models. I think in countries like New Zealand, it is in the constitution that if the inflation target is not met, the governor has to, find a new job. So there are some very strict targets put in some countries, but in other countries, they are not as tough as others. So here, what we would like is that the central bank is not allowed to purchase paper in the primary market, right? It can, for its purposes, trade in the secondary market, but the moment you start, purchasing in the primary market, then becomes a problem. So whether the structure of the board needs to change, whether the Secretary of the Treasury should not sit on the monetary board, those things have been discussed, and there's a draft of a new Monetary Law Act, and the IMF is also pushing to get that Monetary Law Act, but accountability has to be there. Accountability, central bank has very clearly defined responsibilities. So if one gives the central bank the independence, then it has to also meet those objectives that the people of this country expect them to meet. If they don't meet that, then they have to be held accountable in some way or the other.
Right. Dr. Harsha, just 1 minute. Sure. How does the accountability now? The main thing is the government institutions, the others are not accountable. How do you think that we can make them accountable for what they are doing? Because if they're accountable, I think a lot of these corruption, wastages, all these things will stop.
Ultimately, the central bank has to be accountable to the people through the parliament. That is how they will be held accountable. And if the Monetary Law Act has to be strengthened in such a way that they are held accountable, right? And currently there is no accountability. Currently, no one is accountable for what happened. Currently, no one is accountable for how the rupee to have gone from 200 to 370. Currently, nobody is accountable for losing $7.5 billion of forex to just trying to scrape $2-3 million a day. No one is accountable, right? That can't happen, and people are angry that some of those people who should be held accountable are enjoying perks and privileges of retirement. So it is up to the legislature really. Once these reforms come, that we have a very strong accountability mechanism within the central bank, because at least if you're a politician, you go in front of the people every 4 years or 5, and if they don't like you, they'll chase you away. But if others who are not elected by the public and are holding very important positions and taking decisions that are going to have massive impacts both negative and positive on the people, then they also have to be held accountable in some way or the other.
Actually, I was
Right.
thinking not only on the central bank, but the whole government sector, the state corporations and others, how do we make them accountable? Because currently no one is accountable.
No, that is an issue. I mean, when I sit at COPE, we find chairpersons of various companies or state-owned enterprises who come there, and there are hundreds of these things, even though we talk only about a few. I say, we don't know. It was done by the previous chairman. So who was the previous chairman? The previous chairman, I don't know. He is gone. He was appointed by the previous minister. My minister appointed me. I mean, this is a crazy setup. I mean, I concur with you fully, Lakshman, that this is what a system change the people are asking for. One has to be accountable. One has to be accountable, right?
Yeah, this is the gap
And-
we see, because in the private sector, we have accountability. Because if a person doesn't run a company properly, or if it is not, it will be running at a loss, is there. But in the state sector, in the government sector, we don't see this. So that's a big gap which needs to be filled.
No, the accountability is there from a democratic process, because every politician stands in front of the people and asks for a vote. If you haven't delivered, then the accountability comes in the fashion you are sent home. And if you are defrauded, then you have to be taken. I mean, legal action must be taken. But unfortunately, no politician who has robbed has been put in jail thus far. Only man who was put in jail as a politician was poor Ranjan Ramanayaka, right? And that is for saying people were robbing the state, or rather the people, right? So it's a hell of a, how do you do that? And people who have been prosecutions have been stopped midway, and the Attorney General has withdrawn some cases on technical grounds. If they were withdrawn on technical grounds, they have to be brought back again. So these are questions that are being asked. And some people have been promised compensation for what is called quote unquote political victimization for cases that have been, heard in the judiciary and is well known, not just locally, but around the world. So that is why the IMF had said, look, corruption vulnerabilities are, a problem that needs to be dealt with. And today, I don't know whether you saw the advanced report from the United Nations, Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. They are talking about economic crimes against the people of Sri Lanka. I mean, it was earlier war crimes. I mean, the issue in Geneva was about war crimes. But read this today. It is about economic crimes. Right? And what are we going to do about, economic criminals? That's what they're asking. Right? The whole narrative in Geneva seems to be, not that the other has been completely forgotten, but while the accountability process and all that is being discussed, this new component of economic crime has come in. So yes, the people are suffering because politicians, officials, others, and I am not going to say leave business people aside, because like I said, there are two people to a transaction. Right, always one fellow is being identified. What about the other fellow who is on the other side, right? So I think it is a collective responsibility. Sometimes business people like to very is very quick to say, look, oh, that fellow, right? But who colluded with that fellow, right? So it is it's a common responsibility.
Yes.
Talal, I think Mr. Mangala Boyagoda has a question, if you can allow him.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. Yes.
No, Harsha, now at the moment, now look at the economic front. Right now, we have seen the treasury bill rates are going at 33%. The bank rates are below that. Even the AWPR is below that. No sooner put treasury bill rates, you and I have to pay for it. The debt is going to increase. How we are going to address that situation?
I mean, what do we do, Boya? I mean, if the printing press at the central bank is stopped or seriously, reduced, okay, then somebody has got to fill the void, right? I mean, how much is subscribed every week? And the president said, look, he needs a little time. He can't do it immediately. He said something like that in his address, because he also realizes that there needs to be some sort of phasing in of this process. But what else do you do? What else do you do? Right? I'm talking about the serious or significant spike in interest rates. But on the other hand, if people are thinking about a domestic restructure and bills or bonds going to be affected, then that must also be playing, some role in the back of their minds, no, Boya? I mean,
now look at the investors' point of view. Now, the public is now participation in treasury bill market is minimum in the treasury bond market. So all the ETF, EPF are the main investors in the bond market. Now if you are going to restructure the EPF, the return is last year 9%. They are the people who have contributed for the government to borrow long-term funds. At the moment, 42% are held by ETF out of the 8.3 trillion treasury bond. How, if at this hour, this economy, when they have gone for 70% rupee depreciation, 65% inflation, can they take any shocks? The EPF people.
How do they take the shock, Boya? How
Why?
can
Because
they take it? I mean, look, like you said, look at the value of the savings. It has crumbled, no?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's my argument.
So when
domestic debt haircuts, there's no room.
I mean, I am not arguing with you, Boya. I am with you. I'm saying, it is going to be so difficult to sell, right? But my question is, without a domestic restructure, would the foreign bondholders and others agree to a haircut?
Now, look at it, the government, central bank holds 2.2 trillion treasury bills. Convert it to a perpetual bonds and list in the stock exchange, right? And take that out of this thing. One way, there are enough ways you can handle these things.
Precisely. So there are the people who are negotiating this certainly would have to come up with alternative mechanisms of dealing with it, right? And anyway, you have to look at the central bank's net asset position also.
No, it's that's not only the repayment.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can convert those into, perpetuities of some sort. I mean, there are new ways of doing it. You are you're the expert, no, Boya? You're the financial engineer par excellence. You should suggest.
Harsha, now at the moment, because what I'm looking at it, even the ETF take the part of their investment into perpetuity because they are not losing because there's long-term investors there, and we can help the government in order to adjust the repayment pattern.
Yeah, so I mean, so domestic restructure means some sort of restructure. It doesn't mean haircut.
No haircut. By this, there can't be any haircut for these people.
No. So this is what I'm saying. The haircut is going to be impossible to sell, but the domestic restructure can take different forms. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be cutting off, the value of people holding on to, their
Definitely.
savings.
EPF means poor man's sweat.
I
I
don't,
think
I
Boya, you
know.
can make your recommendations because I think Dr. Harsha is the chairman of the finance commission. So I'm sure we will make a proposal and then
Yes.
maybe he can consider it.
Yes.
Well,
And,
I don't have any executive power, so please don't be misled that I have.
Right. And Dr. Harsha, just one last question from me. I mean, I was also there for the IMF meeting with you, and the most of the talk was around social security. So, I mean, the government has put 61,000 families on that, and there is like talk about an increase in Samurdhi. But do you think, I know the answer is already like this thing about how effective Samurdhi is, but Verity research already says that, this can be calculated by electricity tariffs. So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't necessarily agree with that presentation made by Delaney the other day. It is one factor, but I think you need to consider other factors also.
Right.
So the Welfare Benefits Board has been re-established, and the World Bank has been working on identifying recipients for these cash transfers for some time, and they have experience globally, and it must be depoliticized. So a complete overhaul of the recipient list has to happen, because a large number of people who are getting Samurdhi shouldn't be getting Samurdhi, and a large number of people who should get Samurdhi are not getting Samurdhi. So Samurdhi is not the way to go.
Right.
It is too politicized, and the recipients are selected in a lot of the times non-transparent manner. I know as a grassroots politician that my political opponent who is in the government would say, I mean, this was started, come on, we all know, right? The polling agent's son or daughter was brought into the system to collect to select the people, and it happened, I think, some 20 odd years ago, and this is still happening. So they say, look, if you don't come to my political meeting, or if you don't participate in my rally, I won't, they threaten you that Samurdhi would be cut or something like that. So it's completely politicized, and it has to be depoliticized.
Right.
Dr. Harsha, one question from my side. Now actually.
And then you can let me go, no? Yes.
No, yeah, they are asking for system change,
Yeah.
Can you tell us how you are really going to change this system? One thing is the corruption, that is of course one area, but the system change, how do you tackle this situation? System change, can you make a total system change and see that our country will be able to go like Singapore?
I don't know, Lakshman. We are all in this together. I have no greater wisdom than you have on system change. I am just a random sample, one person from this population. So I have my own thoughts, but I think what system change is what people are asking for. Let's have people's voices. Let's listen to them. Let's bring those ideas in. And I think already things are beginning to happen, and we'll have to find a way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harsha. I know you have spent a lot of time with us, but we really appreciate you are coming for this, because you were prepared to face any challenges that were there, and also to give your opinion to us, because a lot of them want to find out what you all are going to do. Because the thing is, today a lot of people are criticizing, but people are not worried about criticism. They want to see solutions, actions, what can be done, because so that's, I think, you are one who has done that, because I know that 1919, or the system that the
1990.
1990, now you see, now there how much of opposition that was there. Now you were able to take that forward, so that's the sort of people that we need, our nation. We need people who can do something, who can make a difference. Now that's a difference, now that really made a difference. So I'm sure we really appreciate, and we wish you all the very best. And I think the president has selected you to take over one of the committees, but I'm sure that you will be able to play a lead role. But I would also request you to look at our side, as professionals. You see, a lot of recommendations are done by the COPE and others, but ultimately they are just put aside, So I think we need to follow this up and get things done. Action is required. If someone had done something wrong, then they must be taken to task, because then otherwise we can't put the country right. But I really appreciate your coming and the good work
Thank
that
you.
you're doing, and we wish you all the very best. Please help the people. The people means that is the people in power will have to help the people who are outside to take this, to solve this problem. We want to solve this problem. We will be able to give all the support from our side, and we will certainly see that whatever correct decision is taken, that we'll be there to support you. And thank you very much, Dr. Harsha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Harsha. And now let's go on to the presentation by Mr. Mangala Oyagoda, who is a financial consultant and a former senior banker. Go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me for today's discussion on debt restructuring and its impact on the economy and the society. Previous speakers, Dr. Harsha and Mr. Dheera Singh, already explained their viewpoint on the debt restructuring and its impact on the economy. Let me first explain the ground reality after Sri Lanka informed the creditors that we are unable to pay our debt obligations, and with the country rating downgrade to restricted default. The macroeconomic situation, the country foreign exchange reserves at the lowest level. The governor recently mentioned at the time that he took over office, he said our reserves were below $80 million. Our debt to GDP is 120%. Inflation over 65%, food inflation over 90%. Exchange rate from 200 to 365, 80% depreciation. Policy rates moved from 14.5 to 15.5%. Now, as an intermediary, look at as a bankers. Now, this time, the problem the bankers are faced with, the banks default on their bank obligation on LC, dues and bills on the foreign banks. With that, what has happened? Foreign banks was reluctant to accept Sri Lankan banks' LCs. Local banks failed to honor swap obligations, and they are now being extended. Local banks' access to foreign currency borrowings drained out because nobody's lending to us. After downgrading, earlier the banks used to borrow dollars overseas because they were allowed to borrow 15% of their capital, and they use for domestic operations. And also because of that, the swap market was very active. They used to sell dollars to central bank, generate rupees, and cover forward their exchange, the forward market. So now, on the other hand, we have seen NRC, RLC deposit flows have come down. Nothing coming to the country. Non-performing loans portfolio has increased according to 30 central bank statistics, about 6.8% as of 31st December. In addition, the bank carrying a large stress portfolio due to the moratorium given. Foreign banks is other thing, the market participants. I'm just giving you to understand the ground reality, whether we can take any other shocks. Because if you don't understand the ground reality, it's very difficult for us to say we can take a haircut or otherwise on the domestic debt point. The foreign banks are not participating in the interbank market because no sooner the country came to a rating default status, what has happened? The local, there are branches of the foreign bank, they are not allowing them to lend to the local banks, neither to central bank, so to the government treasury base. What they do is, whatever the money they collect, overnight basis, they place it with the central bank at 14.5%, the central bank standing deposit rate. So over that, the participants are not there. The reduction in inward remittances we have witnessed, even Harsha was telling, right? Our inward remittances that we were, though we depreciate the currency from 200 to 365, inward remittances flows are much lower. It is now, last month is about 275 million. Earlier, previously we used to get about 600 to 700 million. So in that background, the interest rate environment, if you really look at it, we have seen the high from March this year. We have seen the treasury bill rates moving from 10% to over 30%. The 5-year bond rates are even 28-30%. So the AWPLR, the bank average lending rate from 12% somewhere in March now moved up to 25%. 1-year fixed deposits were 12%, now is 22 to 24%. Savings rates are still remaining at 6 to 7%. Foreign banks, 1-year fixed deposit rate at 5 to 10%. When the local banks are paying 20-22%, foreign banks are offering only 10%. This is, I'm just giving the anomaly in the risk reward structure, because our country's situation at this hour, the macro side and the ground reality, because it's not the same. We can't compare ourselves as a developed country, compare ourselves to a developed country, because our fundamentals are not in place. In that sense, when we are applying theories, right, and also macroeconomic policies, we have to take the ground reality also. Otherwise, we don't see that we can get the proper result. The market liquidity. Now, overnight basis, if you look at the market liquidity, we have seen the central bank is pumping 800 billion to the local banks by using the standard lending facility at 15.5. In the meantime, the foreign banks are depositing 350 billion rupees on an overnight basis to central bank at 14.5. Those days, these foreign banks, they came to the interbank market. They were very active in the treasury bill market. They were very active in the swap market. So these funds are not in the these banks are not lending in the interbank market. They are only playing the overnight. That is why they are keeping their fixed rate at 10% and they're lending to central bank at 40.5. That's the role that they are doing, because they don't want to take, they can't lend if they want even, because that's a restriction. Now with that, now we see the present impact of the economy and the society. We have witnessed shortage of essentials, queues, right, for oil, gas, fertilizer, and medicine. High cost of living, high borrowing rates for all businesses and SMEs are badly affected. Under these conditions, can you go forward without debt restructuring? Yes, we have to. IMF has put the ball to our court. Now they want us to come with a debt sustainability program. We have no other option but to restructure foreign currency debt, because we don't have foreign reserves. There's no avenue for us to get the foreign currency. The haircuts on the capital and interest and extend the maturity of the loan. We have already appointed 2 teams to negotiate. Therefore, I don't want to comment on this matter. The domestic debt restructuring. If you really look at it, the domestic debt, the treasury bill outstanding is about 3.3 trillion, out of which central bank owns 61%. As Dr. Dheeraj Singh mentioned, it's about 2.2 trillion. The central bank is holding 61%. 27% is by the banks. If you go to treasury bonds outstanding 8.2 billion, EPF owns 42% and the banks own 24%. The treasury bond. See, in that sense, the liquidity, the impact to central bank, if there's a haircut on their 2.2 billion, even 20%, their 400 billion will go up. The commercial banks, capital adequacy can affect it, because if they take a haircut on their domestic debt, the EPF contribution, contributors will lose big time, because the last year their return was about 9%. ETF returned around about 7%. And people also suffer from the 65% inflation, as well as the 65% inflation and 70% rupee depreciation. Their lifetime savings, there's no value. In that sense, we have to ask ourselves whether there is any room for us to go for a domestic debt restructuring. Now, what the government has done, the high tax regime. Right now, tax rates are personal taxes, corporate tax, and VAT, all that increased. no subsidies. Now they have to curtail their government expenditure and restructure the SOEs. That is the government objective, governance plan. Now, what I'm saying, without taking a haircut, see possibility, whether we can see a possibility to convert, restructure the domestic debt. Because if you take a haircut with entire economy, everybody is going to hurt. Because the ground reality, ground position is such that nobody is in a position to take a haircut on the domestic debt. I'm personally against taking a haircut because the EPF, the 42% of the deposits they gave to the government from the day one. Central bank is a trustee. So they are being invested in the government by statute. So that after doing all that, if they want them a haircut, I don't think it is desirable, or whether we can force them to get that, because that is their hard-earning money. So the central bank, that's why I told Harsha also, because the central bank owns 2.2 trillion treasury bills. That if we can shift the period long term, I think the government in the breathing space without touching any other debt. I think we can achieve something without objective, at least restructuring of the domestic debt. Now the treasury bills, treasury bonds, if you really look at it, now our country, our savers, we have 3.8 trillion saving deposit in this country. They are getting 4 to 6%. The government borrowing at 30%, 30%, and they are giving samurdhi. Their money going to savings at 4 to 5%. Can they uplift the poor? So if there's a haircut, who is going to suffer? These poor people are going to suffer. So I think we have to keep that in mind before we think about or proposing a haircut on the domestic. I said there are a lot of people are now coming out and telling that we have to restructure. The restructure, I think nobody has asked restructuring. I think we shouldn't propose anything until come to the table for a discussion. At that point, we can bring all these points. Now the government borrowing rate has to come down drastically. I'm looking at it. All of us help the government to convert our savings into treasury bills. What will happen? There's a supply of there is more demand for treasury bills. The rates will come down. Eventually, it will help to settle down all the rates, the lending rates, everything. So that's the healthier, because for us to go forward, we have to support the entrepreneurs, we have to support the SMEs, we have to convert this country to a manufacturing based country. For that, the lending rate is a key for people to expand. I think we have other thing that how we could reduce to debt to GDP ratio is important. So that now at this present rate at 33%, I don't think we'll be able to reduce the debt to GDP. The IMF target is to bring it below 100%. Now it's 120%. For that, high interest rate is not going to help us. My message is, this is our country, this is our problem. We have to increase our domestic savings. Saving is not only money. We have to reduce the waste by reducing usage of water, electricity, all that. That's called the saving for country. Our domestic savings also very much low. If we have to increase our domestic savings. For that, our saving habits we have to increase, because this country became to this situation because of lack of financial literacy. We didn't know how to select even a government. Anything free, we voted. That's the price we are paying. Even we never asked any government what is their strategy to reduce the domestic debt or to increase the reserves of the country. But they did say anything free we gave, as the price we are paying. For that, I think my appeal, or I'm appealing to our Sri Lankans, now the country is in dire state. We need inward remittances. The people now earlier we got 600 million, now we are getting 275 million. If we get that 600 million back, we can increase the reserve because we are not paying the foreign people. At least we can build a base. That is that everybody's involvement, is all the stakeholders must come to one round table to have a short-term strategy, at least 1 year strategy, how we can put this country forward. Because no foreign will come and help the country, but we have to get together and put the country forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bhargava, for the presentation. And now if I can go into the Q&A, I'll just ask a few questions. Can I start off with you, Mr. Devasinghe?
Yes, of course.
Yes. So one of the questions is that, for example, end of 2021, the NPLs were 4.5%. So quarter of 2022, 5.6. And now some estimates say 8%, some even say 10%. So how can banks, like at this moment, anything we can do to control it? And are the banks addressing this issue?
You see, you have to start with the moratorium.
Right.
So that's where the problem started. Now we had the Easter Sunday attack, and then got the moratorium affected industries like tourism, and then came the COVID-19.
Yes.
And throughout, up until now, and still, there was a central bank direction that was issued, but it doesn't say it's moratorium. But it's in a way it's a moratorium because the banks and finance and leasing companies will have to negotiate with their clients and then come to a settlement where they will always ask for rescheduling and restructuring of their debt. So with that, we thought, when the portfolios are under moratorium, they were treated as good performing advances. But now that, it has gone out of the moratorium period, and, we have to provide, the banks had to provide, and that's a high impairment cost. And that's what, and you need to maintain that also in terms of your accounting standards, whatever you may having IFRS or SLFRS or whatever. So that's why the banks have run into a situation where, they are not showing impressive financial results as they did in the past.
Right.
And the fact that, I also must mention as part of my answer to this question is that, we are in a debt crisis, and we can't simply get out of this debt crisis because our economy is down. We are talking about negative economic growth. All sectors are down. Because we are a country which is highly dependent on trade, imports and exports. Even for our exports, say for example, garment industry, 60% of our material is the import component. So without imports, these people are struggling to get some imports to run their industry. So with that, you can't run an economy. So that's the situation.
Yes. And just a follow-up question, you were talking about sectors which produce, like for example, India in 1991, after the economic crisis, they reformed and they never had to face another crisis like that because they heavily bet on the IT sector, which has got them like over, I think, $600 billion in Forex reserves. So is there any sector you see in Sri Lanka which can I appreciate the tourism sector and others, but anything like which can really give us a strong buffer in the future? Because one study shows that, for example, the tourism industry, even before COVID, when you look at India and Sri Lanka, there were more tourists dollars going, the net was negative when it came to India. There was more tourists going out of Sri Lanka to India than coming here. So I'm not against tourism industry, but any other sectors other than these which we can concentrate on?
Of course, we have so many. And if you look at the composition of our economy, our agriculture is only less than 7%. But we have about 70% of the population depending on rural and agricultural activities. So that is a sector that we cannot simply ignore. But unless we uplift the living standards of those people who are engaged in agriculture, you can't think of an economy. And tourism is a highly sensitive industry, you know, for security. You remember in 1982, we had this communal disturbances, and then thereafter for 30 years, you know, we couldn't have, had there been, now at that time, if you compare the tourist arrivals in Sri Lanka and Thailand, you know, almost the same. So what happened? You know, we lost the entire tourism industry for 30 years, whereas the Thailand, you know, grew in multiples, and, you know, you can't now reach the tourist arrivals level in countries like Thailand. And also, we have not targeted the high-end tourists. We have been targeting backpackers, right? And even if you compare a country like Maldives, you know, I mean, one important indicator is that in earnings per tourist per night. You know, in the Maldives, it's about more than 3 or 4 times compared to Sri Lanka. And the other irony is that we have invested so much in tourism infrastructure. You know, I mean, no one, I don't think, you know, anyone has that, including the central bank or census and statistics department or any other authority like the tourism authority, how much investment that this country, the private sector has made on this tourism industry, on hotels and other ancillary activities. You see, compared to that, are we getting a return? I mean, a return must be massive negative return. You see? So, I mean, all in all, answering your question that you asked me earlier is, I mean, we must look at the potential we have in promoting our exports, export industries, right? And we are now in a debt crisis. To answer the problems arising out of the challenges we have at the moment, you know, then no other option but to raise our export earnings and then build our reserves and make it possible, enable the country to repay our debt at some point.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And also just a comment I was reading, like, for example, Maldives and even India, they underestimate the amount for a tourist. We put it at, I think, $180, and still we don't get the required. And if I can go to Mr. Boyagoda, just a question that came up. So you were a past banker. So if you were an active banker, what would you do in this situation?
Do all for this game, but they're given an opportunity. What I will do is really look at the ground reality. I will invest my money. First, I will go and buy a 3-month treasury bill. And I'll try to central bank refinance at 50.5. If not, I will raise deposits the market at least 20-21%. Treasury bill is 30%. Second, I go to 1-year bucket. Banks are offering 21. I'll offer 23, 1% more than the market, and buy a 1-year treasury bill at 30%. Then I'll go to the 5-year bucket. Banks are offering 17, 18. I'll offer 20, and I'll buy a 5-year government bond. By doing that, I'm helping central bank to achieve their monetary objective, because money creation and also the credit creation is not there. So for that, that's what I will do at this hour. I don't want to take a customer corporate risk at this hour.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. And there's a question that's come up. I mean, I think the general public wants to know, and we already saw that the effects of local debt restructuring can be devastating. Even Fitch has agreed. But just like in the extreme worst case, there is a restructure or let's say a 20% haircut. How does this affect the people who have deposited money? So this is just from the general public. If you can go, Mr. Boyagoda, or either a question for both of you. It's okay.
It's a thing we will answer.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Sure. You see, I think this is an issue that have been touched upon throughout this discussion. Right now, even the IMF has concerns. Right. I mean, you have to thank the IMF mission, for making the remarks that they're taken the sustainability of the domestic economy, especially the stability of the banking system, financial system in the country. Therefore, domestic debt restructuring has not been recommended, right?
Yes.
It's a great thing, because I mean, if you look at the assets portfolios of banks, you get most of the banks, mostly private banks, they have invested a lot on treasury bills and treasury bonds, and there is also the liquid asset ratio, and those treasury bills are the eligible instruments that you can only invest to be qualified, to be compliant with that liquid asset ratio. And one other thing that I could not mention earlier, Boya, is that SLDB, right? There is a lot of local investors, including banks, mostly private banks, have invested in SLDBs. Right now, there's one option that is available to the authorities to offer to the banks. Look, I mean, the government cannot find dollars to repay the SLDBs at maturity to local investors, because though it's a dollar-denominated debt instrument, it was issued locally, right? So for them to agree on receiving their proceeds in rupees, in LKR, right? That is one option that we can have, right? So, but the banks also have invested in ISPs, international sovereign bonds, right? Now that's an instrument that was issued in the international market. It's not restricted to local investors. So there are these issues. And the other thing is, now we are running a huge fiscal deficit. Huge fiscal deficit. Even the interim budget, our expenditure, government expenditure, and they are curtailed the capital expenditure as much as possible, and it's mostly recurrent expenditure. And total expenditure is twice as much as the estimated revenue. In our budgets, in the past, if you look at, as far as revenue is concerned, we always at the time of introducing or presenting the budget in Parliament, getting approval, we have overestimated our revenue. And when it comes to actual numbers, at the end of the day, we have lower revenue than estimated in the budget. And on the other hand, the expenditure, always we get supplementary, budgets coming in Parliament and getting approval. So the gap increases. So however much, whatever you say at the beginning, at the time of you presenting the budget, going to bring the fiscal deficit down to 5% or 6%, that will not happen. That has never happened in the history. So with this, what happens is the government has to borrow. Right now, we are in a debt crisis. Government is in a situation where the government is unable to pay for it. But when it comes to domestic debt, the only situation near breathing space the government has is what is government in economic terms is power to create and power to spend. What do you mean by power to create? Power to create is a power to print and power to spend. You go to Parliament and get approval and print, and then you spend. So likewise, now at the moment, we are in a huge debt crisis. But what will happen in the interim budget also, we are borrowing more, right? Borrowing more. So our debt stock will increase. And what happens, ironically, is that, you know, the central bank has over 2.3 trillion T-bills. Now, most of this debt which will be issued will be bought by the central bank, because there is no participation by market participants, you know, other than the EPF and ETF and other institutional and captive sources, right? So what will happen is the central bank will buy treasury bills, and what do you mean by central bank buying is printing. The central bank will be printing and lending to the government. On the money that he printed and lent to the government, there is an interest. 30%, 32% interest. I mean, we are creating a situation. It will ultimately become unsustainable. So we have to stop this at some point. You know, only way we could do that is to curtail this wasteful expenditure. Wasteful expenditure. You know, that if the government revenue is in 2 trillion, we must restrict the government expenditure also to 2 trillion. Why 4 trillion?
Yes.
You know, this is the question the public must be asking.
Yes, that's true. And just to follow up, like, because, for example, we see the spending like salaries and interest going up to 130% of government revenue. And according to a minister earlier, 86% of government revenue goes to paying salaries. Do you think the banking sector should be a bit more assertive and push more for the SOE reforms? I don't know if it's more controversial, but...
Yeah, we had no efforts in the past. You know, I can remember for the last 25, 30 years, there have been, you know, committees set up and various strategies proposed. Nothing has happened. And at the moment, this interim budget, at the time the budget was presented, the president himself mentioned by name the Sri Lankan Airlines, Ceylon Electricity Board, the Petroleum Corporation, Railway. Railway is a business, but railway overtime bill is more than its revenue. Exactly. Can you believe? Overtime bill is more than its revenue, right? It's a funny situation. I mean, these reforms have to take place. At what cost? I don't know. I mean, can we continue with this? It must be very, very painful. I mean, those people who are employed are looking at the government servants, you know, if these reforms come into play, then you'll have to curtail their salaries and other allowances and new recruitment. So there'll be unemployment. Government is the major, you know, provider of employment to the youth. So that will stop. So there'll be huge unrest. You know, these are issues, you know, that have to be discussed and solutions found. I mean, no such dialogue is taking place.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. There is a, I want to clarify one point. Now, the local banks are holding international sovereign bonds.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have bought this at a discount. Now, some banks have bought this at 40 rupee, $40 to a $60. It's $100 maturity. Even if there is a 20% haircut, still the banks are making money. That right?
Yeah. If that is the case,
yeah.
You know, I mean, at what rate they have bought.
Yeah.
Information is confidential. They won't.
The banks bought at the secondary market.
Some reliable source, they are bought it at a deep discount.
Yeah,
then
that's
they
correct.
can go for a haircut. Yes.
Definitely. Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Tala, just to add one point, what Mr. Dheera Singh and Mr. Boyagoda mentioned, I think the current indication is that they may not go for restructuring of all local debts.
Yeah.
What they are thinking is only the central bank holding of treasury bills and bond.
That is not what I think.
Exactly. 2.3 trillion. Yes.
Yeah.
So if there won't be any kind of severe impact on the banking sector in Sri Lanka.
Okay, that's right.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanda. And just another question, I can give this to Mr. Boyagoda. In terms of the banking crisis, if there was to become a very serious one, you think consolidation would be a
Definitely, that will
solution?
happen because
That will happen.
that's only the answer. No? So we have
Right.
because we have so many banks. The merger is the answer. That will happen.
Right.
Even the
Right.
companies for that matter. We need a very
Right.
strong banks to going forward. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So how will that sort of impact? So that's going to have a positive impact to the other stakeholders as well.
Yes.
Sure. Right. Thank you. And all right. Thank you, everyone. I think we're coming to a close. If you have anything else, Professor, or I'll just give it to Mr.
Maybe
Bandara. For the, sorry.
Yeah, the two speakers may have some final comments. You can
Sure.
ask them.
Sure. Sorry. Can I have your final comments? Mr. Dheerasinghe, you can go first.
Sure. I mean, our discussion is on debt restructuring and sustainability. And that's the point that the IMF mission also has mentioned. And we are all looking at IMF assistance. I mean, we feel that there is no other option in this situation without the IMF support. IMF support is like a global insurance cover. And also something that I also must tell at this last few minutes I get is that the IMF money will come to the central bank, not to the government, right? That has not been said anywhere, right? And that will only strengthen the central bank reserves. The government cannot use that money for government purposes, right? And also the IMF mission has categorically stated that, IMF assistance is contingent on many other conditions, including that restructuring and other measures, right? If those measures are not seriously, looked at and then considered and some action plan has put in place, IMF assistance will be a far cry, right? And even the IMF has given its approval by the IMF Executive Board. The IMF money will be released in tranches, in installments. So maybe $2.9 billion. The first tranche will be about 400 to 500 or even less million dollars. So if we comply with the conditions that we have agreed upon with the IMF, then we get the second tranche. If there's violation, if the situation is not up to what they have expected, then there will be a delay in getting our second tranche, or maybe the whole program will be suspended. So those are the kinds of risks that we'll be running with the IMF. Right. Those are my final comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dheerasinghe. And Mr. Boyagoda, your closing comments.
Yes, it's because we are a sick patient. Right? For that matter, one person can't carry him. Everybody has to hold it. All the stakeholders, you can't work on silos. Everybody has come to a one round table, plan our strategy for the country for 1 year. We can come out of the woods because our GDP is 75 billion, it's nothing. So we can turn around. There are enough people to support. And for that, the policy frame has to be there. People will have to be there. Even everybody, even household point of view, even we must produce something for exports. That's the future is going to be. So over that, I think this is stakeholder game. If you get together, we can put the country right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyagoda. And now I'll go to Mr. Bandara for a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Talal. Thank you, eminent speakers, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. It may not be an easy task to make the concluding remarks covering all the areas the eminent speakers spoke of. But let me take 3 to 4 minutes to highlight a couple of important points and propose the vote of thanks. Many economic experts raise the sustainability of debts just after COVID-19, very early, many of them recommended economic reforms to avoid any debt restructuring. International rating agencies alerted on the same, and many policymakers denied it or silenced about these alerts. However, the debt restructuring has now commenced, and there is very little meaning in complaining, and we all must face the reality. At the same time, we can't make a mistake. This is because we haven't done it before as a country, and it is a very technical subject that needs specialized help. Simply, Sri Lanka cannot allow debt restructuring to be mishandled. This means debt restructuring without making structural economic reforms can lead the way for another restructuring of debt if it is not done successfully. The consequences of this are that economic activity and growth will slow down. Mishandled debt restructuring leads to instability in the financial system and many other economic problems and crimes, as mentioned by the Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Harsha Silva. In debt restructuring, any creditor will first try to make their case as a special creditor and avoid the restructuring. If it's failed, the creditors will try to expand the net as much as possible, including domestic creditors, and share the pain with everybody. So if that happens, there will be a huge impact on the financial system and society at large. I think in today's discussion, we were concentrating more on this area. Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe, as well as Mr. Boyagoda, as well as the Honorable MP, specifically mentioned what would be the kind of impact that the domestic market will have, and as a result, what would be the overall impact on the society at large. So understanding the depth and gravity of managing the debt restructuring professionally and transparently is just the first leg to a very long journey. So it's not an easy task. Right now, none of us have the exact information. We just read the magazines and various other information made available to us, and we are trying to come to some kind of conclusion. But we need to wait at least another 1 or 2 months and see what would be the kind of outcome and what will be the impact on the society and to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, with those remarks, on behalf of CMA, I would like to thank all our eminent speakers, Honorable Dr. Harsha Silva, Member of Parliament, Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe, Mr. Mangala Boyagoda, and Moderator Mr. Talal Rafi, for accepting our invitation and sharing your knowledge to educate the participants on a timely, important topic which has an impact on our day-to-day life as well as future of our country. More importantly, for taking time off from your work schedule to be with us this afternoon. Your participation is a source of encouragement to CMA, and we deeply appreciate your contribution. I'm sure that the matters discussed by the speakers will assist all participants to be aware of as to why all of us are facing all these issues. Let me also thank our President, Lakshmana Vatavale, who organizing this seminar under the CPD program. Finally, I would like to thank all our council members and all of you for your participation, and the CMA team for the support extended to conduct this event. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My thanks to the three speakers, Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe, Mr. Boyagoda, and to the CMA, Professor Vatavale, Mr. Bandara, and council members. Thank you very much, and for all the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Talal, for a very, very effective and also a very good moderation of the sessions. And also, I think all the thanks have been given, but let me also thank all of them for accepting our invitation, Mr. Dharma Dheerasinghe, Mangala Boyagada, and of course, Dr. Harsha De Silva. And Mr. Hennaka Bandara, who's also a banker. I think as Dr. Harsha mentioned, he's also a banker, who was the chief of the National Savings Bank, and I'm sure they are also having their own problems, which I think he should have also taken up, but maybe they are to a very lesser extent. So thanks everyone, and also all our participants. And maybe we need to continue this discussion, because we have to see how we can really overcome this situation, but how the professional bodies can help, especially from our side, on the financial management, on the cost management, the expenditure management, efficiency, the productivity. I think those are the key areas that has to be done if we are talking about debt sustainability, because we need to pay these. So thank you very much, and wish you all the very best. And we meet again maybe once we have our another seminar that we are having. So thank you and all the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you.